I am so glad we're here. And yes, we are going to talk about politics today, but I can promise you it's a safe space. You're not going to be lectured, and no one is going to tell you who to vote for. I'm going to ask a series of questions, and I'm going to ask you to stand up. And Kate, we're going to play this game too. Stand up if, when the subject of politics is mentioned, you start feeling a bit sick. Safe zone. Stand up if, since you were 18, you have skipped a general election and not voted. Ooh! Stay standing up, stay standing up. Keep standing up. Stand up if you don't know the name of your local MP. Keep standing up, stay standing up. Stand up if you can't explain first past the post. Keep standing up.
Nobody sit down. Everybody keep standing up. If you were standing up before, stay standing.
I just want you to know that you're not on your own. It is completely normal if you stood up to any of those questions. And don't worry, because we've got Kate Nicholls in the room who's going to explain it all for us. Thank you very much. Okay, so just so you know, until 2 years ago, I would have stood up to every single one of those questions. And I think we've lost Dame Karen, but the only reason I'm standing here today and the only reason those photos are on there is because of Karen. So Karen has been the chair of the Hospitality Sector Council, which was set up in COVID. We may hear about it. And it's full of big business. You know, you've got Fuller's, they're all there, Burger King, huge businesses. And she asked Will Beckett, who is an amazing individual, who's one of the co-founders of Hawksmoor, to chair a group, an advisory board called the FBI, which is the Family Business and Independence. And so just before the Hospitality Sector Council, he'd have a call. I was on the call, and there's 20 of us on this Teams call, and then he'd take our views, the SME views, to the Hospitality Sector Council. Anyway, 2 years ago, he phoned me and said, Emma, I've just opened Chicago, and I'd like you to chair the group. And immediately I said, Will, I don't spend enough time with my children. I don't have time for this. And he said, I knew you were going to say that, so I've arranged a call with Karen. And if anyone knows Karen, you don't say no to Dame Karen. So Kate is also on the Hospitality Sector Council. So that was 2 years ago. I knew nothing about politics. It was a banned subject in my house. My parents didn't tell me who they voted for. Since then, I've been invited to interview Rishi Sunak live on Sky TV. I asked him all about how he was going to support female entrepreneurs. I asked him how he's going to support the hospitality industry. I've been to Number 10 several times, and I'm also a very proud member of the board of the British Beer and Pub Association. So that's the from to in 2 years. Thank you. So, but don't worry, because Kate has been living this for decades. Hope you don't mind me saying that, Kate.
I don't mind you saying that. That's fine.
Kate, when you went to university, you said you wanted to be a war correspondent.
Yeah, I wanted to be the next Kate Adie.
And I was going to say, there might be some people in the room who don't know Kate Adie is, but we will explain that. I have seen you in the firing line, Krishnan referred to it, ever since. You have been in a firing line. I'm sure the room would love to know, from war correspondent to here, chair of UK Hospitality, representing every single one of us in this room brilliantly. Can you tell us about your journey?
Yeah, I mean, my journey is a weird one. So I am the first of my family to go to university. I mean, I was listening to Dame Karen with that sense of and her daughters saying, how do you go one better than your mum? First of my family to go to university, went to a Sync Comprehensive in the Northeast, had a bit of and this might also, as a cultural reference, lose people in the room, had a bit of a history boys moment of a teacher who just sort of said, you're quite bright, you could go to university, and ended up going to Cambridge. And the first day that I was at university, they stood up and they said, at the time, this is true, and this tells you how old I am, only the top 10% of the population go to university, and you lot in Oxbridge are the top 1% of the top 10%. And in my college, it was 60% state school. So they added at the end of it, don't let people down. You are there to represent. And that's kind of what's taken me all the way through as I've gone. So you do have that imposter syndrome and you don't fit in and you aren't in the right place at the right time, but you just have that bullish, I'm here, somebody's given me a voice and a power, I better use it. And so when we were going through COVID, it's that sense of, and I think I said this to a journalist probably in that interview where I'm in a suit, why are you so passionate about this? Because there's 3.2 million people work in my industry who are reliant upon me doing a good job to not let them down. So don't let down the people that you're trying to represent was sort of one of the things. My journey through was having kind of fluked it and got into university and got into a great college. I fluked it again because I got a training contract to be a journalist. I did want to be Kate Adie. She grew up in the Northeast. You wouldn't think it because she's got a cut-glass accent, but she comes from Sunderland and she was a working class woman made good. And you can't be what you can't see. So you can see her. And she did the first live televised 24-hour rolling news when the SAS stormed the Iranian embassy. So everything what goes around comes around. And I graduated in the first year of the graduate recession, and they cancelled the training place and said, go away and get a year's experience or go travelling. Yeah, right, you're a working class kid, you can really go and do a gap year. So I went and got a research post in the House of Commons, had a brilliant woman who worked with me, actually it was in the European Parliament, brilliant female boss, and there were virtually no women. Everybody there was a touch typist secretary, if you were a woman. She said, you'll work for me in Brussels, Strasbourg and London. And then she said after a month, I don't think you're fully occupied, so I think you should go and work in the House of Commons too. And my husband's a minister, so can you go and work in his office at the same time and get that experience? And then I moved into Whitbread, and that was it, hospitality. I love it. So politics and hospitality and communication, telling stories.
Do we need to tell everyone about the crisps?
The crisps. That was how I got, that's how... That picture of me in the Devonshire eating sticky toffee pudding there's a lovely journalist called Jess at the Times who got out of me the story of what was my proudest achievement and what am I best known for, and it's saving the prawn cocktail crisp.
I think that deserves a clap.
Because there's quite a few other things, but Brussels was going to ban a whole load of food additives, flavourings, colourings, saved caramel in beer. You wouldn't have been able to have British beer brewed in the way British beer was brewed if it hadn't been for the work we did. And you wouldn't have been able to call dairy milk chocolate. Brussels would have banned that. But the headline that grabbed the attention was Brussels was going to ban the prawn cocktail crisp. We saved it. As a result of that, Whitbread asked me to go and be their government relations interface and be a board advisor. So that's another bit of imposter syndrome. You're 23 and you're advising the board at Whitbread. And Dame Karen was who I saw when I was first there. They just bought Café Rouge, sorry. And again, it's that kind of, you're walking around in a whole office where there are no women apart from the secretaries, apart from Dame Karen, which is just brilliant.
Thanks, Kate. Right. 2 years ago, my partner gave me this book, and I left it on the shelf because it, again, made me feel sick. But a year ago, I did actually read it. Apparently, Ian Dunt's a great speaker and hilarious. So, I mean, you can see it says Westminster's broken. Karen, sorry.
Okay.
Kate, we've been talking about Dame Karen. How broken is it, and who's trying to fix it?
We get the system we kind of deserve, in a sense. For everybody who stood up and doesn't engage, that's part of the problem. That's why it's partially broken. It is broken because you are in touching distance of the first female MPs. You're not that far back. You do go back to Nancy Astor, but she was an aristocrat, so she's not really quite normal. But Diane Abbott, first female black MP, you've got parliaments within my working lifetime of 30 years that don't have much female representation. You get to the top of the senior civil service, and it is very public school. It is therefore very male, it's very Oxbridge, and part of the problem is that the system that we've got, the civil service, the Rolls-Royce, the sort of engine of government, breeds that in, because every civil servant will move within a 6 to 12 month rotation to go further up. If you are in the Foreign Office, you're on different postings every 2 years. Very difficult to manage that around being a woman. We have the first female head of the civil service just appointed within the last month, and boy, was that quite a controversial appointment. And it shouldn't be that way, but it is broken because you get that whole mentality. So I still sit in rooms with civil servants, and my role is to be the industry civil servant, where they are talking about, well, it's quite easy doing shift patterns because everybody works the same shift pattern. Everybody works 9 to 5. It's a 48-hour working week. You clock in and you clock out is their idea of what a factory still is like. And then they'll say to you about our ways of working, well, it's fine because you choose a 12-week reference period for 0 hours contracts and guaranteed minimum hours contracts. And within that 12-week period, somebody will be working exactly the same shift pattern. So that they have no hinterland or mentality other than what they've grown up with. And it's a bit like teachers. I can say this because I come from a family of teachers. They've only been to school. And these civil servants have usually only been to university, then gone on the fast track, and then worked in the civil service. And that's all they know. And it's not a criticism. It's just, that's why we need to be involved and be engaged, because we get the politicians we deserve because we don't engage in it. We get the civil service we deserve because we don't engage in it. Politics, you said, to stand up if people feel sick at the mention of politics. Politics has the single biggest impact on every company's risk register, and it's greater in the UK than it is in any other country when you talk to companies in our sector. And so we need to be involved in politics because they need to get it right, and they won't get it right unless we tell them. And they don't get it right unless we tell them again and again and again. And the senior civil service is not very female. It's not very family friendly. It's not very diverse. And usually the way they have of working it, and it's the same for a lot of senior men in business and certainly in our sector, their wives have functioned to make everything work for them, and that's how the senior civil service functions too. So somebody else does it. So I went to number 10, just a side story, and then we can move on. I went to number 10 last summer. They were wanting to know what would make the Great British Holiday cheaper, more flexible, give greater deregulation to companies in the sector. And one of them came up with this bright idea, and they were talking about it, which was totally deregulate school holidays during the summer and actually throughout the year. And it was, I think I was there was 2 women in the room and there was 20 people, and the other woman was quite young. And I sat there thinking, I'd never be able to go on holiday with my family because every single school would have a different holiday. Have you not thought about this? And they genuinely hadn't, and they genuinely didn't understand how it would make it more difficult for working women, and how could you work through, and yes, explain to them about how challenging it is to work during the 6-week holiday and how much you are juggling, and then to add that complexity in, and it was just completely outside their sphere of reference.
I'm sure, like many mums in the room, I'm starting to feel a bit sweaty and sick. Right, so we had the budget at the end of last year. Over 1,000 pubs popped that sign up. We didn't at the Lucky Saint, but that's another story. How important is it, do you think, that hospitality businesses themselves engage? Is this the right thing to do? What was your view on that, Kate?
It's quite a controversial move, I think. I'm just going to correct one thing that Krishnan said at the start, introducing me. I'm not there to support the government. I'm there to champion my sector, to support my sector, to be your voice of all the people who are working in it. So I have to work with whichever government is in power, and I give criticism without fear or favour. However, I work on the basis of iron fist in velvet glove, and it's a bit like Sarah's brilliant story about how you go in and negotiate. It would be very easy to slap people around and slap them down and tell them, and I wouldn't get through the door the next time. Nobody would. It's the same as any negotiation. This is Grassroots Action, Grassroots anger in action, and it's very visceral, and it does grab the attention in the same way that tractors in Whitehall grab attention. They don't change policy necessarily. You have to have the behind the scenes continuous talk, and it's all about creating a win-win-win space, and this just puts a barrier in that. You can't have a dialogue. However, what everybody in the industry needs to do is engage and get involved, because MPs work on the basis of how much post bag do they have, and ministers work on what's coming up in the post bag. So every time that we have something that's a big event, everybody goes, oh my God, it's catastrophic for the industry. And I meet an MP who says, nobody's told me about it, nobody is talking to me about it in my constituency. Votes matter and issues matter, and they only judge it by how much it's coming up and how much then they filter up. And it works in a cascade. It's exactly like customer service. Your basic MP at the front sees there might be an issue. You need to have the dialogue. You then have the dialogue and they go, oh my God, this is a real issue of concern. I might find that there's businesses and jobs and closures coming through. I will feed that up the chain to the minister. I'll feed that up to the Prime Minister. I'll feed that up to the Chief Whip. And that's the only way that you get pressure for change growing. So whether people want to engage in this way or want to just be polite and right, or you can go and just turn up. There's things called surgeries that MPs have. You can just go and turn up on a Friday, Saturday is usually when they're held, ask for a meeting and say, I'm really concerned about this issue. There's somebody like me when I started my career who has to deal with all of that and will provide that answer. But the quickest way of providing an answer is to go to the minister, to go to the civil service to ask for the answer, in which case they go, that's not just an isolated issue, that's 2,000 people writing about it. So yes, we had, I can't remember, how many did you say? Over 1,000. We had 6,500 letters generated from the taxed out letter writing campaign. You've got 25,000 that were generated in the budget campaign. All of those are what creates the real weight, as well as something like this, but it sort of grabs the attention.
Okay, thank you. So this used to be the politics in the UK. This used to be it. So you had Labour there on the left of centre, you had Conservatives on the right, and obviously had the Liberal Democrats in the middle, and we had a coalition because the Conservatives couldn't get enough seats. But what's really interesting over the last few years, we've now got things pulling apart. So you've got further on, obviously on the left, the Green Party with the win the other day, and we've got good old Nigel over there on the right. Quite different. I think what's really interesting is how, if we can get the clicker working, what that's actually doing. So, and this is where you're going to learn what first past the post is. So Labour famously had this landslide victory, it's all red. However, if we had what's called proportional representation, it would have been quite different. Kate, could you explain this to the room, and is it important, and should any of us care?
We should all care because it matters for how we are governed. And usually what people say to me when I talk to them about politics, other than please shut up and I don't want to talk about it, it makes me feel sick, is I just want stability, I want certainty, I want to be able to plan. And for our businesses, that's critically what we need to do. But actually this matters for all of us because we are all involved in using the health service, involved in using education. We've got children and we want childcare. As women, we want to know that we are looking after both ends because increasingly we are caring at both ends. So, you know, all of those preoccupations that we are juggling in the back of our head, and I'm pleased that Dame Karen replays conversations as much as I do, these things matter. To my mind, it's much harder when you've got proportional representation to have a clear direction and a line of sight as to what is the government going to do. And most people in business just want certainty and stability. First past the post is the system where it's winner takes all. The minute that you get the most votes in a constituency, you are the person who's got that seat, and that aggrandizes up. So whether that is seats where you win by 6 votes, Sarah Pochin, Rochdale, Rossendale, the newest Reform MP, 6 votes, she wins it. Zach Polansky's Green Party snatch from Reform in Manchester, in Gorton, because more people voted for them. That's not necessarily necessarily a reflection of what popular sentiment is. That's a we don't want reform in this constituency, so we'll all vote. But it's winner takes all. So the red majority in first past the post, it's called a sandcastle majority. It is very, very wide, but it's very shallow, and you've got lots of seats that will change on a swing. So that majority can be wiped out when the tide comes in. And you've got lots of ones where there's a majority of 260, and 200 of the seats have got a majority of less than 1,000. So that means it's quite vulnerable. But it is just first past the post, and it gets to the stupid system whereby if the votes are tied when you've counted them, you are looking at where does the cross look as though. People will often spoil their ballot papers, and sometimes you will say that might be an indication of a vote. Or in one case that I've been involved in, they flipped a coin because the votes were completely tied and you just flip a coin. I have had it counts where you're debating, is that cock and balls, pardon my French, drawn more in the Conservative box or the Labour box, and does that count as a vote? And it has. Proportional representation is designed to capture the sentiment in the country at the moment, but it leads to coalition, and most of us didn't like that coalition feel when we had it. You had a lot of compromise, and if you've got a five-way coalition or rainbow coalitions, that's going to be challenging. We are likely to see it in Wales and Scotland come May the 7th. And if you put up the five main parties, actually Wales and Scotland, you've got a sixth because you've got the Nationalist Party. And usually there was a great, I put it up on my Twitter yesterday for anybody who wants to see it, a great thread that was looking at actually this is not voting intentions. There is a class distinction, but actually what's driving it at the moment is economic insecurity. And the more economically insecure you are, I can comfortably afford a whole lot of nice things and I'm well off, down to I can barely cover the necessities. That's what pushes people to the two extremes on either side. So it's a howl of alienation in the middle. The only ones that are left in the middle as core voters of Tory and Labour are the ones that are comfortable economically. And then it depends on how socially conservative you are. And if you're liberal, you will go to Green, and if you're not, you'll go to Reform. It's not splitting along right-left lines. It's a howl of alienation in the middle of I can't afford things.
Which is quite different.
It is very different, and it makes it completely impossible to predict. And then you've got the Labour Party doing very unpredictable things. So people like me who are paid to analyse and assess what's happening and give businesses advice on what is happening and what is a government going to do, you can't advise at the moment because it's so unpredictable.
I thought this was fascinating, so I'll explain this to you. The bar to win has never been lower. So in 2019, because we only really had two parties, you needed 50%, which is quite a lot to win a general election. Get to 2024 and it's gone down to 40, but in some areas it's as low as 26, and that's because there's five parties or more if you're in, Wales or Scotland. How much of a problem is this, Kate?
It's a huge problem, and the other part that is alongside it is the number of people going out to vote. And that's also why that share has gone down. So this means that smaller parties can snatch it. You've got much more tactical voting going on. You've got voting blocks that are going on. You've got people like Carol Vorderman telling you who to vote so that you are voting out a particular party. That's really unpredictable. So the feel that you are not getting the party that you voted or wanted goes higher. That bar to getting past the post, first past the post, is lower if you've got a lower turnout. So all of us who are turned off by politics and don't get involved, then again, you've got that bigger problem. Yeah.
Can I just have a show of hands? We've got anyone who's 35 or under in the room? Cool. So, over 65-year-olds, I'm not going to make you put your hands up for that, 76% of over 65-year-olds vote. For the under 35s, that drops down to 47. So you can imagine you don't need to, have a degree in statistics to understand that older voters are deciding who runs the country. And I can tell you, in the under 35, it's 50-50 split, male to female. It's the same. 47% of men vote, 47% of women vote. For men, they're more likely to vote Reform and Conservative. Females are more likely to vote Labour and Green. What does this mean for the women in the room, this chart?
Well, there is a positive to take from this chart, because once you get to the older age demographics, the over 55s, and certainly the over 65s, it's women that disproportionately vote. It's men that switch off and don't vote as much. So this is female concerns when you get to the older age demographic come through. That sometimes feeds through to issues that are of relevance to our children. You know, you will think about student loans, you'll think about housing, but largely it translates through as to your putting policies forward that older voters will want. So you get the distortion with things like winter fuel, free bus passes, free TVs, lots of well-off baby boomers in the over 65 category who arguably don't need it as much, dictating what public expenditure is going on when you've got very tight spending envelope. And the biggest one is the triple lock on pensions. So you've got triple lock on pensions, pensioners really well protected, and in the meanwhile, the younger age demographic can't get on the housing ladder, have Plan 2 student loans. It's not really that surprising either that your issues don't get the prevalence that it deserves because you don't have MPs that represent you. So the one thing that's good that's come through in this parliament is you had a lot of unexpected winners in Labour who were at the start of their parliamentary career and so are aged 30 to 40. Some of them are younger, but they didn't expect to win. But they are the first generation that's coming through as MPs who are impacted by student loans. And suddenly the party is talking about student loans, and both parties are. But this means that you're losing out. If you don't vote, your concerns are not being heard. If you're the one who shuts the door when the canvassers come and say, I'm not interested, rather than asking the question, then your concerns don't resonate as highly. It's back to the same point about hospitality. If the manufacturers are shouting louder than we are, then their issues predominate and ours don't.
Okay. Right, just very quickly, we are the 6th largest economy in the world, but for representation, female representation in Parliament, we're 43rd. Should we just sit with that? We're 43rd in the world. And there are a load of countries I could have named above them, but there's loads of them. This is Emmeline Pankhurst. That photo was taken over 100 years ago. Very briefly, Kate, because I know we're out of time, how do we think about where we are now, where that was, without it feeling like a history lesson?
I always think it's amazing that it is within touching distance. You know, this is my, I know I'm old, this is my grandmother, you know, not her, but, you know, she was born 1908. So, and she was a working class woman, and her parents put a cross in the census in 1912 because they were illiterate. That's in my lifetime and lifespan, and you put your hand back and you're touching that history. When I worked in the House of Commons, there were 10 times as many male loos as there were female. There was no creche. Sittings started at about 3, 4 o'clock in the afternoon because men were working in their law firms. So it's not surprising you don't have that much representation because the working environment was just so crap. You know, you didn't have that ability. You were working late. You were sitting and debating during the night. How do you have a home life with that? The other thing that I would say, which is much more modern, you know, this is us shouting about representation, but also shouting about how badly we are treated. And think about how those women were denigrated. And the biggest shame that we have as a society. The world of work is immeasurably different from when I started to my daughters now. We denigrate women in public life in much the same way. You should see the sewer that is my social media. In the last 5 years, I've had 6 death threats, 10 rape threats, 2 violent threats to my daughters. Those are only the ones that merit reporting to the police. So, you know, I'm not a politician. I'm just a normal businesswoman. I just run a small business. I just try and do my best to speak up for my sector. Why would I put myself forward for any more abuse than you get? And when I started in Parliament, we didn't have emails. We didn't have mobile phones. So you weren't chased around the internet every single time. And again, in the same way with these women, these very brave women, in touching time of history, you know, it's a very physical, visceral, sexualized language that is used to denigrate and put down women and stop us speaking. And so those of us who have a voice, it's our duty to try and use it.
Thank you, and I'm so sorry that's happening to you. Don't worry, we're going to end on a high. They're my kids, so that's B and T. I want them to know the history. I want them to know that they can vote, and I want them to know that it didn't come at a cost, or it came at a cost. Sylvia, who is Emmeline's mum, said, "Great is the work that remains to be accomplished. Kate continues to champion our sector." And then this is Helen Pankhurst, who I had the absolute privilege of talking to last week. She said, "The struggle isn't over yet." Before we leave you with the 4 things that you can do when you leave this room, Kate, we're going to have a general election in a few years' time. What is the struggle for you and hospitality, and what do you want to see change in the next few years?
Well, we have elections coming up in May that are key for Wales, Scotland, but also local government, and a lot of power is now devolved locally. I mean, at a personal level, I want to see more people engaged in politics, just so that they can have their voice heard, they can have their say. I'd like to see nobody standing up when we get to the next general election saying they haven't voted. People died to give you the vote. How can you give up your chance to have a say and a voice? But for hospitality, I'd like to see a better recognition of the importance of our sector, not just in political life, but also in our communities. I'd like to see our careers valued. You know, 57% of our workforce is female. We generate 38% of all first jobs, the sector that has the highest. 80% of our people don't have degrees. So, you know, we are the ultimate meritocracy. We are local jobs. We provide great quality careers. I'd like to see that reflected and valued, and the service we provide recognised at a political level, but also at a community level.
Very clear. And by the way, this is the reason I am wearing green, purple and white today, because it's the suffragette colours, and you're going to see way more of them, because in 2028, it'll be 100 years since women had the vote. However, as you saw, and you heard today from a couple of people, women are unrepresented in Parliament, less than 40%, and it should be 50%. So that's Helen's mission, so get involved. Right, we're going to leave you with the one to take the photo of. By the way, this deck is online. It's on CORE's website. Support others, share, talk about this stuff, take it to your business, go through the deck, have an open conversation, engage your MP. There's the websites for how you do that. As you heard, they will see you, even on a Saturday. Join a trade association if your business isn't already. There's lots. I've put some of them up there, but obviously we've got UKH, you've got BBPA, you've got SEBA, etc. And finally, please vote and encourage others too. So I'm going to leave it with you, Kate, for the last word of the day before we all rush to the toilet.
I would just say, if anybody was wondering why you had purple drinks outside, that was also why you had purple drinks. They are the suffragette colours. It was purple elderflower, green leaves and a white straw. So celebrate it and use it. And also make sure, we've talked about hospitality, but politics affects all of our daily lives. It's intrinsic in everything we do, everything that Dame Karen talked about, everything that David and Sarah talked about. Politics impacts on that. So make sure that you do take note of it, and use those 4 tools, because we get the political system that we deserve. So if any of you feel alienated, then stop, think, engage and vote.
Kate Nicholls, everyone.